Good to see you here again. In this module, we're going to talk about decisions. Players making decisions is largely what makes games different from other types of entertainment media, like books or movies. Yes, I know you can have games like Candyland and Snakes and Ladders with no decisions, and something like a choose-your-own-adventure book that has decisions, but on the whole, this is the kind of defining thing about games, so let's talk about it.
I may have mentioned this quote before, and even if I didn't, you might have heard it before. It's a pretty famous line. Sid never meant this as any kind of definition for games. What he was trying to say is that a good game is a series of interesting decisions. Basically, that the quality of gameplay comes down to the quality of choices that the players make and how interesting they are. Now, keep in mind, Sid Meier is best known for the Civilization series of games, so yeah, if you're making a game in the 4X genre, decisions are pretty much at the core of that. If you're making a walking sim, like Gone Home or Edith Finch or To the Moon, those games are more about telling a compelling story in pieces, and they're highly linear, with almost no player choice, just some light exploration, so this isn't even universal. And lastly, it's worth asking, even for games where decisions are important, what makes a choice interesting or not interesting? This is starting to sound a lot like saying, good games are fun, right? Does interesting actually have any meaning here? In this case, I think it is possible to be a little more precise about what kinds of decisions are interesting and why, but first I'd like to talk about the opposite, decisions that are not interesting. Now I'm going to talk about three kinds of uninteresting decisions, but I will caution you the words I'm using to describe these are just words that I made up to describe them. These are used in my lectures and my writing to describe them, but they are not common terminology in the game industry or among game designers. We don't really have words to talk about this, which is why I invented some, just so I could talk about them in my classes. At any rate, the first type of uninteresting decision is what I call a meaningless decision. The player is given a decision, but no matter what they choose, it has no effect on gameplay. I remember this happening a lot in very early console RPGs, like the first Dragon Warrior game, where you'd wander up to a castle guard and they'd ask, "Wouldst thou like to see the king?" And you'd be given a yes or no choice. But if you say no, then they say, "But thou must! Wouldst thou like to see the king?" And then they give you the same question until you say yes. So it wasn't really a choice. But thou must is even the name of this trope on the TV Tropes website. The problem with meaningless decisions is that they aren't really a decision at all. Yes, you make a choice, but the choice doesn't matter, so why bother giving it to me? In most cases, you're better off just removing the choice entirely, or else making the difference between the choices meaningful. Next are what I would call obvious decisions. You're given a decision, it has an effect on gameplay, but one of the choices is very clearly superior to the others, so there's no reason for you to choose anything else. It's a choice, but not an interesting one, because there's only one viable option. One example of this is the board game Talisman. In this game, you roll a die, then move around the board, but you can move left or right, so there is a choice. However, much of the time, one space is clearly better than the other. Like one space says, gain 4 gold, and the other says, lose a turn. The board game Trivial Pursuit also tends to be like this, where moving one direction takes you to a space that helps you satisfy a victory condition, and the other directions don't, so of course you pick the one that does. Or you're given a choice of 2 spaces with different trivia categories when you're better at one category than the other, so of course you go for your stronger category. Sometimes you see this in video games too. In the first Mass Effect game, you were given many choices throughout the game to accomplish things one of 2 ways, which were marked as either Paragon or Renegade, and you got bonuses for acquiring a certain number of Paragon points or Renegade points that made some situations easier. So going Paragon or Renegade was a meaningful choice, but once you decide which one you're going to do, there wasn't much incentives to switch. So if you're already doing a Paragon playthrough and the game gives you a choice of doing something the Paragon way or the Renegade way, that's an obvious decision. You go Paragon because that's the character you're playing, and the game strongly incentivizes you in the mechanics to go all in with one or the other. As with meaningless decisions, if you have an obvious decision, the usual answer is to either make it meaningful by giving something positive or negative to both choices so that it's more of a trade-off, or just remove the choice entirely, automate it, automatically choose the right one so the player doesn't have to. The last kind of uninteresting decision is what I call a blind decision. Blind decisions have an effect on the game, so they aren't meaningless, and the right answer isn't immediately clear, so it's not obvious. But the problem here is that players don't have enough knowledge about the game state for the decision to have meaning. Playing rock, paper, scissors against a truly random opponent is like this. You have no way of knowing what your opponent is going to choose, so even though your choice has an effect on the outcome, and it's not obvious what to pick, you still also have no information about what your opponent might pick, so you may as well just guess randomly. Lots of gambling games are like this, guessing a hidden number, placing money on a specific number on the roulette wheel. anything where you're given a choice, but ultimately it's random, and that any choice of yours is just as likely as any other choice. There are plenty of cases of blind decisions in games. A lot of level designs are like this, where, say, you walk down a hallway that ends in a T intersection. You can either head left or right. Or there's a hallway with 3 doors, and you have to choose which door to enter next. If they all look the same, which way you go is just a random guess. Now, if the level designer adds some environmental clues, like putting a bunch of skulls and blood down the left side to suggest more danger that way, then it's more meaningful. Another common example in games is something like the player being given a set of face-down shuffled cards and being told to pick one, and you get what's under it, or picking 2 cards and you get a prize if they match. If the cards are truly randomly shuffled and you only get one guess, you might as well guess randomly, or have the game make a random guess for you. Or you can make it more interesting by adding more information. In Super Mario 3, for example, you played this memory game which seems random at first, but if you play enough, you'll eventually realize there are only 8 distinct shuffles, so it's not completely random. And if you know what those shuffles are, you can choose specific spots on the board to determine which of the 8 boards you're on, and then if you have the boards memorized, you should be able to clear the board completely on every single try. So it's more a test of memory, which is at least something that a player can fail at, so it's better than random chance, and it's at least initially a puzzle-solving aspect of figuring out the optimal first picks to determine what board you're on, once you identify what the 8 shuffles are. So while these types of decisions are usually not great, there are some key exceptions to be aware of. First, meaningless decisions can still be worth keeping around if they have emotional impact. My favorite example of this is the board game Monopoly. If you played Monopoly, what playing piece do you choose? Is it the car, the shoe, the dog, the top hat? This has no meaning in the game. None of the pieces have any special abilities or powers that make it distinct from any of the others, mechanically speaking. The pieces don't even make sense. Like, one of them is a thimble, one is a clothes iron. What do those have to do with real estate development? And yet, most people have a favorite. And there have been fights over who gets to be the wheelbarrow or the battleship or whatever. Likewise, in most video games, your main character's appearance has no effect on the game, but some players will spend hours in the character creator just getting their look right. So a choice can be emotionally meaningful to a player, even if it isn't mechanically meaningful. An exception to the obvious decisions being meaningless is that they become a whole lot more challenging if there's time pressure. If you've ever played a rhythm game like Dance Dance Revolution, Guitar Hero, or Rock Band, your goal is just to hit the notes with the right timing. So for each note, there's an obvious choice. You hit the note or you don't. Obviously, the choice is to hit the correct note. You never want to miss intentionally. But the notes come at you quickly enough that just doing the obvious thing is challenging. There are some card games where players flip over cards one at a time according to simple rules, but if you flip up 2 of the same card in a row, first player to slap the pile gets some kind of gameplay advantage. Again, no one's deciding, do I slap the pile or not? If I slap it, I get an advantage. If I don't, then I don't. It's just whether you can notice a gameplay situation faster than anyone else. Some decisions which might otherwise be blind can come down to psychology. In rock, paper, scissors, or other guessing-type games like that, against a human opponent, you can try to read the other player's body language and try to figure out what they're trying to do. In poker, so much of the game is keeping a poker face to avoid giving information away, while looking for tells from your opponent to try and figure out whether they're bluffing or whether they have a really good hand. Mechanically, the decision is blind, but you are playing with other humans, and their behaviors do in fact give some key information, sometimes, and your goal is to read that information while avoiding giving out that same information to your opponents. Among Us, pictured here, also a great example of this. Suppose Orange calls an emergency meeting and says, "Hey, I found the body of Blue, but I didn't see anything there." And then Yellow says, "I saw it, Pink is the imposter." And Pink says, "No, I saw it, Yellow is the imposter." Who do you believe? It's a blind decision, except that you're able to take into account player behavior, like how different players voted and reacted in the past. And if you're playing with people you know, and especially if you're in the same room where you can discuss a person and hear everyone's tone of voice and body posture, you can take that into account as well. When dealing with multiplayer games where you're trying to figure out what other players are doing, blind decisions aren't always quite as blind as they appear. Another example of blind decisions is many gambling games like roulette or craps or slot machines. These are compelling mainly because there's a real-world outcome the player cares about, specifically money. In these cases, it's the thrill of winning or losing money that's compelling because that has a real effect outside of the magic circle of the game. Remove the money component and it's much less interesting. Imagine if you had a roulette wheel at home and wanted to play with your friends where you just gave everyone 100 chips and kept letting people bet on each spin, but no real money would change hands. You're just playing for fun with no real stakes. that game suddenly is not very interesting at that point. So now that we've covered the uninteresting decisions, what's left? I've told you what not to do, but what about what to do? Generally, when you're talking about interesting decisions, what we really mean is some kind of trade-off, where the player has several things they can do that are all at least somewhat good or somewhat bad. Resource trades are the most obvious, right? I'll trade you 2 wood for your clay and your wheat. These tend to work best when the value of each resource is relative or varies over time. If wood is always worth 2 points, and clay is 1 point and wheat is 3 points, and the only thing these are useful for is points, then you can just do the math and it's not very interesting to trade. But if sometimes you need wheat a lot, and other times it's totally useless to you, and its value is different to each player and its value changes over time, then this can get a lot more interesting. Risk-reward trade-offs can be a lot of fun, and let a player opt into either safer or more risky behavior. Usually this is shown as a choice between one safe choice that guarantees you some known payoff versus another choice that gives a potentially greater payoff but also a higher risk of failure. You see this option a lot in professional sports, where teams that are behind can make a high-risk, high-reward play that's unlikely to score, but can score a lot of points very quickly if they pull it off. Usually teams don't take the risky option, but if one of them is way behind, they might use it to try to catch up quickly. I've seen this in video games too. A special move in an RPG that has a 50-50 chance of missing entirely or scoring a critical hit. That's mathematically worse than just attacking normally, but sometimes it might be worth it if you need to do a large amount of damage quickly, like if a boss enemy is almost dead but also preparing for a heavy damage attack. Push your luck mechanics also fit in this category. You can keep what you found so far and walk away, or you can keep going and risk it all to possibly get better rewards. Another common trade-off in games is the choice between getting something useful right now or something much better if you wait, so that the player has to decide between immediate needs and long-term goals. You see this a lot in deck builder roguelikes like Slay the Spire, where you might choose one ability in your deck that helps you a lot in the early game, but it'll be a liability much later on, or a different ability that'll be great against the final boss, but not very helpful until then. You also see this in tech trees and RPGs, where a player gets to choose an ability on level up, and they might choose something at a dead end of a tech tree that gives a really useful ability now, or they might choose something that's not that great of an ability on its own, but it unlocks the path to a very powerful ability much later. Lastly, you can have a choice between several good things where they're all good, but you have to choose which one is the best, or the opposite, where you have a choice between several bad things and you have to choose the least bad option. Ideally in a case where the values of these things are relative or shifting or otherwise not perfectly clear, so that it isn't just an obvious decision to take the one with the biggest payoff. This is not a complete list of all types of trade-offs, but you can see a common theme here. Basically any decision where the player is judging the value of several things, where the values are relative, shifting, or otherwise not certain or obvious. For games where you're primarily thinking and strategizing and not just playing an action game based on time pressure, these are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about, designing mechanics that put players in situations where they'll be making these kinds of trade-offs. I have one other thing to mention about making decisions, and that comes from the difficulty of making a decision. To a 4-year-old, tic-tac-toe is a fascinating game of strategy, but to most adults it's way too simplistic. To some people, chess is a great strategy game. To others, it's way too complicated and mystifying. Both chess and tic-tac-toe involve decisions. What makes those decisions compelling to a person or not? And part of that comes down to the skill of the player versus the challenge of the decision. Here's a diagram that most game designers would be familiar with. This is a graph that shows the player skill on the horizontal axis and the level of challenge on the vertical axis. If you're on the bottom right part of this diagram, you have a high level of skill and the challenge is low, like an adult playing tic-tac-toe, the game feels too simplistic and you're bored. If you've ever played a video game that just felt like it didn't present nearly enough challenge, you might have given up before getting to the end, even if it felt like you could do it, just because it felt like it was dragging on for too long. Meanwhile, on the top left of the graph, if you have a low skill and the challenge is very, very high, like a 4-year-old playing chess against an international grandmaster, there's likely to be a high level of frustration for that little kid. If you've ever seen someone who doesn't have great reflexes or other action video game skills playing a really difficult game like Dark Souls, they're likely to rage quit before too long. The game is just too hard, and you just don't even see a path to thinking about how to eventually win, so you just give up. However, if you are at the level of your skill, so that it's difficult but not too difficult, if you feel like you can succeed but only if you try very hard, then your brain actually likes that, and it'll engage extra power to try and push itself so that you can succeed. We call this a flow state, sometimes being called in the flow or in the zone, and it can happen in many situations, not just games. Now, flow is not the same thing as fun. It's not as simple as saying just challenge the player at their ability level and then your game is fun, problem solved. It's not like that. But being in a flow state is something that is generally pleasurable and something that game designers want to be aware of. And this explains why some children's games, even games like Candyland or Snakes and Ladders that have no decisions at all, are still fun for young children but not for adults. Even though there are no interesting decisions, for a young child there are still challenges here. They are still building proto-game playing skills like how to roll a die, how to count spaces, how to take turns, how to follow rules, how to recognize a goal, how to display good sportsmanship when you're winning or losing. And these skills are not instinctive, they have to be taught and learned through repeated play. When a young child masters these skills, that's about the time when these decisionless games stop being fun for them. One last thing for today. We can go one step beyond just making interesting decisions to making ways for players to execute a plan which lets them feel really clever when they pull it off. Game designers refer to this as player agency. A player has agency when they understand enough about the game to be able to form a plan and receive enough feedback from the game to know that the plan is working. Feedback in this case, when I say that, is not related to the concept of feedback loops that we discussed in the last module. It just means that the game is reacting to the player and the game state. Like if you're playing a platformer and you get hit and take damage, how do you know that you took a hit and took damage? Probably your avatar plays some kind of I was hit animation, might suffer knockback, the screen might flash red, your life meter decreases, there might be a sound effect, and all those things together are feedback to let the player know that something happened. If you have low levels of feedback in your game, then the player might not realize that something happened at all, which then means they might not understand how the game works, which then reduces their agency. So you can see here that if the game offers low levels of feedback, that limits player agency. With high levels of feedback that make it clear what is happening and why, the player may or may not still have agency, but the game's interface at least won't be getting in the way. Agency can also be limited by the embedded narrative. Again, that's the story that was put there by the game designers or game writers, because the embedded story is fixed and takes away from player choice. If you've ever played an RPG where a key character dies permanently during a cutscene and you have no way to avoid this, even though you have resurrection spells and items that work just fine in combat, Final Fantasy VII was known for this, you've reduced the ability of the player to plan and respond to that event. We come to the end of another module, some additional tools here. Formal abstract design tools, to my knowledge, is the first article written about player agency and shows what it is and where it comes from. And since this article is much older, it uses different terminology than we use today. Doug Church uses the word intention or intentionality to talk about what we call player agency today. It uses the term perceivable consequence to mean feedback, and it uses story to mean what we earlier called embedded narrative specifically. But this piece ties those concepts together in more detail than I've covered here when I talked about agency and feedback, so this is a more in-depth treatment of that. The GDC talk Designing to Promote Intentional Play by Clint Hocking takes that even one step further. He said, okay, there's this thing that Doug Church called intention, we now call player agency. How do you actually design games to do that? It's a classic GDC Talks from 2006 that's equal parts informative, useful, and hilarious, though I will warn you, Clint Hocking is also known for strong language. He drops F-bombs frequently whenever he talks, so be aware of that going in. What I've linked to here is a zip file from his website that contains the slides and speaker notes and some supplemental videos that are referenced in the slides and notes, because if you just look at the slides alone, they will probably not make much sense. You kind of have to look at the whole package together. And if you want to read more about flow and fun and learning in general, this time I don't have a specific online reading for that for you, but there is this wonderful book I can recommend that goes into more detail. This book has been out for a while, so you might be able to find a used copy cheap, and it's not one of mine, so I have no specific financial interest in this one. This is not a book on how to design games, it's more of a theoretical text on what game design is. What I like about it is that it's short and you can probably read it in a single day, and half of the pages are cartoons, so if you're really in a hurry, you can just read the cartoons, skip the text, and it'll still make sense, and you'll get the general idea and read through it in like 15 minutes.
But even if you can't find that book, or choose not to, definitely go take your assessment so you can get your certification from HP Gaming Garage. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time when we'll talk about kinds of players.